If you've fantasized about leaving your job, if you've thought, hey, maybe I should go and start my own business, maybe I should align my creative works in the world in a way where it can support me financially, and you've seen other people quit and it seemed to work out for them. And so you think to yourself, maybe that's how you do it. Maybe you just quit one day on a whim and it just works out. And if you've had this thought, I want to introduce you to the concept entitled the false exit. And this concept will help to ground you in a strategy and an approach that will serve you as you pursue your path, whilst making sure that you don't end up falling victim to this illusion that just quitting on a whim is going to give you the path that you would hope for. And my name is Joe Yulee. I'm a philosopher. I am deeply obsessed with vocations and paths and making your soul-led calling a reality in the modern world. And this is why I'm here. This is why I educate people via YouTube and write articles on Substack and do talks on podcasts called the Career Archetypes Podcast and do posts on Instagram. It's to make sure that anybody who wants to know what their calling is can find it, because our adult life is spent, the majority of it, doing work. And if we don't do the work that we're called for in that time, we can go on later on in life regretting that, hey, I didn't pursue my calling and I never felt as though I got to know what my potential was in its realized form. And so this is why I do this. And the interesting thing here is that when it comes to pursuing your calling, when it comes to making it real in the world, so often people want it to happen overnight, in 30 days, even in 6 months. They want it on a timeline, and their own timeline. They want to have complete control over it. And yet it really happens like that. And when this occurs, especially in seeing the flood on social media that seems to show a world or a reality where the majority of people quit their jobs on a whim, and 30 days afterwards, them earning an income and earning a living from their passion, and it was just as easy as that, it contorts what is actually going on. And I work with people all the time on pursuing their path, and I often tell people, especially students that ask me, should I just quit because I vaguely know what my direction is, am I ready, can I go? I often tell them to hold off, to pause, to pull back. And more development needs to be done, both on the steps that are about to be walked and also the calling that you feel within, and mapping it out properly, understanding its terrain and understanding what it is that you're meant for at a deeper level than simply, hey, just go for it tomorrow and then hope it all works out. And the more common thing that happens when people go and they quit on a whim is that they don't quite make it. They don't get to the other side. They don't have a path where they feel as though they're truly embodying their calling. And instead what happens is that they end up in a job that is similar to the first one, but they go in a roundabout way to getting there. So let me explain the false exit. This happens when someone has some sort of inclination towards pursuing their path. It might be a little bit clearer than fuzzy, but they have a sort of sense of this is what I want to be doing, and it has some edges, it has some concreteness to it. It might be, hey, I want to start a business, hey, I want to serve this particular kind of person, hey, I want to create work that is in this medium or this format, maybe it's painting, maybe it's writing, and so they have an idea of what that looks like, and so they feel as though they're ready. And they think that, hey, if by just simply taking the leap, it'll just work itself out. And they might even have some savings. They might have 30K in the bank. And so they're prepared for a 6-month period whereby they don't need to finance themselves. And they expect that during that period of time, they'll be able to make that money back. And so that's what they do. They go and have that conversation with their boss, which is their monumental moment. And it's a very big moment, the moment that you quit your 9-to-5 job and the way that you've been earning an income for a long period of time to sustain yourself, to pursue your dreams. But the next moment is one of more importance, because now it's game time. Now it's time to start to bring this into the world. Now you've got to start to say, hey, here's what I have and here's what I'm doing, and get some sort of reciprocal trade whereby you can finance yourself. And once someone has quit their job and they're beginning to go and moving forward, their finances will typically dwindle. Now, our finances are connected to our sense of safety, especially if you've spent the majority of your life in a domain that is a 9-to-5 domain. You would expect the weekly paycheck and the cycle where it just comes in week by week by week on a recurring basis. And to have that pulled out from you, the psychological impact of it is, oh shit, my safety is suddenly declining. I'm losing a sense of my grounding. And so even though you've got a savings amount for, say, 6 months, over, say, 3 months, if you haven't sort of figured out how you're going to finance yourself, the stress starts to come in. There's a worry that this isn't going to work out. And so that 6-month period that you had set aside is suddenly corrupted by unnecessary stress that's flooding in. And you start to think like, shit, is this actually going to work? Am I actually going to get to the other side? Am I actually going to be able to make it? And then it starts to hit these levels of self-doubt that you didn't have, or maybe you did have in the beginning, but the pull of the ideal was so grand that it took over your attention. And now the attention of worry is taking over, that you're not going to make it or that you're not going to get there. And what ends up going on is that oftentimes, this is an example, but I've seen this timeline happen time and time again, about the 3 to 4 month mark, people start to go, well, I'm not going to make it. Maybe I should go and get some random jobs that have nothing to do with my calling. Or alternatively, I need to start getting my resume together and just start applying for anything because I need to pay the bills and I need to make ends meet. And so if you don't have someone else there that can support your finances, it becomes an incredibly stressful period to the point where you might end up back after that 6-month period, back in some other job that isn't aligned, that isn't your calling, but at least now you're able to pay the bills, you're able to make sure that the lights are on, you're able to make sure that you have shelter over your head. And at this point, cynics might look at this and say, well, see, you shouldn't go and pursue your calling. You shouldn't go and pursue your purpose. It's too dangerous. There's too much instability. It might not work out for you. But that isn't true. Instead, a different approach is needed. And so rather than approaching it in such a way where you risk yourself and your livelihood and you sort of put everything into chaos and it might never sort of come to fruition, you do it in a slower way. You transition in a way where it's steady, where you have some grounding underneath you, and you can also work on and mature your path. Now, the reason most people don't pursue this route is because it's slower. It's because it requires more patience. It requires more steady steps, and it requires a higher pain tolerance whilst relentlessly pursuing your calling. One great example of this approach is Elizabeth Gilbert, who is the famous international author, is known for her book, Eat, Pray, Love. Now, she wrote 3 different books prior to writing Eat, Pray, Love. And between these different books, she was doing and working a job as a bartender, as a waitress, and later on, prior to Eat, Pray, Love becoming the success that it is, she was doing some freelance writing as well. So she was financing and supporting her lifestyle right up until her craft and her vocation could support and finance her. And it is a completely different approach because the way in which, or at least the romantic view on how to pursue your calling, is to almost go blindfolded, to close your eyes, to jump off the cliff, and everything will just work itself out. And yet this second approach, which doesn't allow for the false exit concept to come in, whereby you just end up back in a job having never really progressed in your vocation, and all you really have to show for it is a traumatic experience, and you might not even want to go ahead and pursue something ever again. This alternative approach allows you to slowly, steadily work on your craft to get better and better each day to the point where it eventually is able to take over. And it never puts your finances at risk. And this is why unideal jobs can be used as stepping stones, can be used as stepping stones to get you to your calling eventually. Now, it might not happen in 3 months. For Elizabeth Gilbert, it didn't happen after book 1. It didn't happen after book 2. It didn't happen after book 3. It happened after book 4. And that's years of work. And if you were to ask people like, hey, can you wait for a couple years prior to your vocation actually coming to fruition? Most people are unable to do that because they want it to happen now. And yet, because they want it to happen now, they're actually sacrificing the majority of their working life. Let's say that your working life is 30 years and you are able to work fully for those 30 years. If the first 3 years are made up of you working as a bartender, as a waitress, as whatever other job you can do, whilst you fund your vocation that you do in the early hours of the morning or after work late at night, then the next 27 years are you pursuing your vocation full time, where you can actually figure out how this works and how you can bring in finances to support yourself. Now, if you were to take what I call the false exit concept and say, okay, how do they do it? Well, they quit on a whim and they want it to happen within 30 days to 6 months. And if it doesn't happen, they end up going back into a job that doesn't feel aligned, and they either never try again or they continue that cycle. Or the other thing that can happen is that they end up bringing forth something that is like semi-aligned. It's like a business where some of the stuff is like they kind of like it, but then the other half they don't really like it, so it's not the thing. It's not hitting their sweet spot. It's really a temptation path. And what ends up happening for them is that they end up spending those 30 days to 6 months pursuing their vocation, and then they don't do it again, and then they end up working an unideal job for the totality of their path, for the totality of where they should be spending the majority of their time in their vocation. So we have two very separate, very different approaches. We have one where they spent in their lifetime about 6 months pursuing their vocation. And we have another, a slower one, where they spent 2 to 3 years of trying to work on their vocation, not rushing it, whilst also working unideal jobs, and then eventually transitioning and then having 27 years where they were able to pursue their vocation. If you look at it like that, if you look at it in its true contrast with the totality of time in view, you'll notice that the slower transition, the one that most people don't approach their path with, is the superior one. And it will allow you to not only be able to be calm as you approach it, to have stability as you approach it, but also inevitably have the majority of your vocation fully involved and engaged doing the work that you love. And that's the most important thing. And if you're interested in learning more about how I help people to choose the right career path with conviction and then transition into their path in a way that supports them, in a way that allows them to align the life that they desire with the actuality of actually experiencing it in this lifetime, then check out the Unearth membership. In that membership, I have a course and it guides people through this process of unearthing their career archetype step by step. You'll see other members in that membership where they'll be sharing their experience, sharing their own career archetypes and how they're walking their path. And you'll get to see firsthand that a life where you pursue your calling, it's real and it's possible. And so I'll leave the link underneath this video.